I'm Tyler Ward. I'll be attending UNR.
I'm Elise McMurtry. I will also be attending UNR. Our teacher is Mr. Clark and our coach is Mr. Carlin. Thank you for joining us.
Make sure you guys use the microphones. It's very loud there. Pass next year. Yes, yes, please. Thank you.
Unit 1, please be seated. Question for you this evening. What are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? It was through the drafting of these state constitutions that Americans first developed principles of constitutionalism and republicanism that were then adopted at the federal level. Do you agree or disagree with this assertion of an American scholar? Why or why not? When the colonists found themselves nearly in a state of nature after 1775, why did they feel compelled to promptly write state constitutions? Most state constitutions reflect a belief in legislative supremacy. Why? What arguments for and against legislative supremacy can you make? You may begin.
In his Rights of Man, Thomas Paine wrote, "A constitution is not the act of a government, but of a people constituting a government." Upon drafting state constitutions, Americans in the newly freed and independent states first developed their expectations for democracy, such as popular sovereignty, limited government, and the protection of natural rights. These democratic ideals would later be mimicked in writing the U.S. Constitution.
While principles of constitutionalism and republicanism were not originally developed by state constitutions, John Denham was correct in that they were formalized in these documents and then adopted at the federal level. Proportional representation, an aspect of republicanism, had an early application in the Virginia House of Burgesses, where the council consisted of 2 burgesses out of every town, hundred, and plantation.
This system was solidified in the Virginia Constitution, where the House of Delegates had representatives apportioned by county. Exclusion of this tenet in the Articles of Confederation resulted in its fulfillment in Article 1, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution. A principle of constitutionalism, checks and balances, existed prior to state constitutions in the New York Charter, where the royal governor had the power to veto any bills passed by the Assembly.
Upon writing the Massachusetts Constitution, John Adams wrote that it's by balancing each power, the executive, legislative, and judicial, against the other two, that the effort in human nature toward tyranny can alone be checked. These checks and balances were adopted into our Constitution, as through the power of the executive to curb that of the legislature in Article 2.
It was not necessarily a state of nature, but a state of emergency that propelled states to create constitutions post-1775 to solidify revised forms of government to maintain state sovereignty. Following the Declaration of Independence, British colonial charters were discontinued. Only state assemblies and committees had retained authority through popular consent, thus creating limited governments. Acknowledging Emer de Vattel's idea that a sovereign government is one that protects natural rights, states, beginning with Virginia, included a Declaration of Rights in their constitution.
These declarations guaranteed what had been known as the rights of Englishmen in the Magna Carta, something that the colonists believed they deserved, such as due process, writ of habeas corpus, and property rights. This would later be reflected in the Bill of Rights that ultimately allowed for the ratification of the U.S. Constitution. Through these constitutions, each state was able to act as what Justice Louis B. Brandeis termed laboratories of democracy, implementing state sovereignty.
Conflicts between the colonists, the royal governors, and the British monarch led to the Revolution, rendering the states cautious of a strong executive and favorable towards legislative supremacy. In 1927's J.W. Hampton and Company versus the U.S., Congress was given certain control of executive officers' public regulations, continuing the idea that legislative power is a check upon the executive. Furthermore, as expressed by John Locke in his second treatise on government, quote, legislative supremacy provides for the authenticity of the social contract, for there remains still in the people a supreme power to remove or alter a legislative act contrary to the trust reposed in legislators.
However, as has been seen by the 112th Congress' failure to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act and the Senate's recent lack of votes to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, controversy within a powerful legislature slows the progress of society. This was further emphasized by the 2013 government shutdown.
Through constitutions, states were able to create independent governments to comply with specific public standards of constitutionalism and republicanism particular to each. Dual constitutionalism was formed when the Constitution not only adopted these principles, but also endorsed the idea of state sovereignty through the 10th Amendment. Thank you.
You talked in your testimony about the state constitutions having the Bill of Rights. And starting out, most of the state constitutions during the Revolutionary period started with the Declaration of Rights. But the U.S. Constitution that was ratified in 1788 did not. Can you explain the reasons for that difference?
One of the largest problems with only the states having these Bill of Rights was seen when George Mason pointed out the fact that only 3 states in the colonies actually had the freedom of speech clause in the Bill of Rights. So they believed that the national government should protect the freedom of speech.
However, the Constitution itself included a lot of the principles that were enumerated in state Declaration of Rights within the articles of the Constitution. For example, the right to religious liberty is implied through Article 6's protection of representatives not having to take religious tests.
Are state constitutions even necessary today? Why or why not?
State constitutions are necessary today to continue the system of federalism that was set up early in the United States history. As can be seen with the issue with Cliven Bundy in Southern Nevada, even though his argument is not backed by the Constitution, he does make a compelling case for states' rights, and state constitutions help to solidify those rights.
When you said the Constitution, are you talking about the Nevada Constitution or the U.S. Constitution, please?
I'm sorry, the Nevada Constitution.
Thank you.
George Washington thought that local governments were supposed to give their citizens morals and values, and that's why we need both state constitutions and a national government in order to make sure that both levels are reaching what they're supposed to.
If you look at the United States today, there are over 300 million citizens that live within it. And in Federalist 10, they believe that a nation so large would be so hard to control. So I do believe these state constitutions are necessary, especially seeing how each state has their own diverse population and their own needs.
What might a government look like in which either the executive or judicial branch is the supreme branch? Could you provide some specific examples?
The executive traditionally has a lot more power than he's supposed to, given the checks and balances. For example, President Lincoln, in the Revolutionary War, took away habeas corpus, and also in Guantanamo Bay, prisoners currently don't have habeas corpus either, which that's infringing upon individuals' rights.
In Federalist 78, Alexander Hamilton said that one of the great things about the judicial branch is that it wields neither the power of the sword or the purse, which are held by the executive and legislative branches. However, if there was a system of government in which the judiciary was supreme, it would be implied that they would receive these powers and then they would not be an impartial judiciary anymore.
In the mid-1930s, there was a governor named Huey Long from Louisiana who actually, he has a quote that said, "Buying politicians is like buying potatoes. It's easy." And he became the ultimate political force in Louisiana, and he controlled every single piece of legislation, and he had every single congressman and assemblyman under his fingers, basically. So this type of executive doesn't work well because the people didn't have a say in what the laws were.
What philosophical influence, if any, influenced the framing of these constitutions, deriving from the experience in ancient Rome and Greece, and specifically the writings of Montesquieu?
I think one of the largest and most prevalent philosophical ideas that came from the Constitution is actually something they disregarded to put in the Constitution. In Article 2 with the executive branch, they actually looked to George Washington as somewhat of a Cincinnatus, and they believed that he would be the man to fill in all the gaps of what the executive branch would be and how it would act in a free country.
State constitutions, harkening back to some of the dictators in Rome and the fall of the direct democracy in Athens, were fearful of a strong executive. And so, for example, in the Delaware Constitution, they decided to give the legislature supremacy and actually put most of the executive's power under the control of the legislature.
Montesquieu believes that separation of powers should be in the government for it to work balanced, for it to be balanced. And this can be seen in the Massachusetts Constitution, written by John Adams, that originally set up the three branches and the checks and balances between them.
Which branch do you think is most...
Time, Judge, sorry. Nikki, leave it up there when they're done, please. Thank you.